Hi everyone, Coach Brandy here from Feed Your Soul Fitness. I'm excited to do coffee with Coach Brandy. I do have my iced coffee here, started with the day. Today's summer solstice, which is a fantastic day of the year. If you didn't know, it's the longest day of daylight. And from here, ironically, we actually start getting darker, but it's so slow, so incremental, you won't even notice until around August. So I hope you can enjoy this beautiful summer season. We are talking about planks today because summer is notorious for wanting to get stronger in the arms for tank top season and things like that, but also core strength plays such a strategic role in summertime activities like stand-up paddleboarding, kayaking, riding a bike, whether it's on a road bike or a mountain bike, and frankly, even just camping, lugging around firewood and your coolers. So we're talking about planks today because I want your core to be strong. When we've got a strong core, we're gonna have a lot better of a safe back as well. Having really good, healthy, strong back will help you. So if you struggle from back pain, it's probably because you've got a weak core. And your core is so much more than just your rectus abdominis working at the front. It's an entire band around your entire body, and that's why planks are so great. So obviously a few of us have some aesthetic goals as well as far as trimming down the midsection. A lot of that's gonna come from nutrition, so don't think that doing planks and sit-ups are gonna be your key to either six-pack abs or just a nice toned stomach. You've got to get your nutrition dialed in. However, putting, gaining lean muscle in your core will be important as well for that aesthetic feel, so that as you approach nutrition and you shed fat from the midsection, those muscles will be more abundant. But from a functional, structural point of being a human being, a strong core is very important. So here we go, jumping into planks. I'm gonna talk about proper form in a classic plank. I'm gonna talk about some variations in plank, and I'm gonna give you my absolute #1 bonus tip for in any plank, especially just a classic plank, what you can do to really fire up those core muscles. So make sure that you watch the full video. So proper form in plank, I'm dominantly going to focus on what we call a high plank, meaning you're on your hands. So for those of you with wrist and elbow issues, you know, one of the big things to ask yourself is like, is this a preference, or is this like I absolutely can't, or is this like there's some discomfort? You have to figure out what's right, work with your doctor, work with your physical therapist, but a high plank has you setting up where your hands are directly under your wrists. Now, a lot of times, I'll drop to my knees for a moment just to show this, because it is in proper form, is that people will hyperextend their elbows. And so with that hyperextension, see how my elbows are rotating and I kind of sink into my shoulders? That is incorrect form. So having a partial bend to your elbows is very important right off the bat. And then there's a principle we call that we call stacking joints. So getting your shoulder over your elbow over your wrist. And really the most important thing is your shoulder over your wrist. Because if you're holding your plank back here and your shoulder is not over your wrist, your butt up is in the air, you're really losing a lot of that power that you will get in your core. So making sure you've got that stacking joints principle of shoulder over wrist, and then making sure your elbows are not locked out. Key principle #1. Now, when you're starting out, let's think about your feet. When you're starting out, typically a little wider of your feet being apart will be helpful for you, whereas you progress, getting your feet right next to each other is important. Reason being is you're gonna have a lot more of a stable foundation with your feet to be wide, whereas if you are gonna have your feet a lot closer together, it's going to be less stable. Plus, you can think about this midline of your body. The midline literally is the crease of your legs running all the way up through. So when you're in a plank, you're squeezing everything to that midline, including through your legs, squeezing your inner thighs together. Naturally, when we squeeze our inner thighs together, we can engage our glutes. Glutes are 100% a part of your core and 100% a part of a successful plank. So when you've got your feet hip distance apart and they're right next to each other, you are able to engage your glutes. You are able to squeeze your inner thighs together so that you actually can feel a lot of traction in your pelvic floor as well as your low core as well. Let's talk a little bit about the head and neck alignment. I know a lot of times we want to look down at our feet for whatever reason that is. So a lot of times we'll get what we call a droopy head, meaning the head will kind of come down because you're looking at your feet. Neck alignment is really important, and I like to talk about how we don't want to have any wrinkles at the front of the neck and we don't want to have any wrinkles at the back of the neck. So having a neutral neck, just like you would standing, is really important, because when you're standing, you don't look down, right? Because that's not good for the neck. It's stretching out the muscles at the back of your neck, it's shortening the muscles at the front of your neck, and that's what leads to what we call like text neck. And we want to really make sure that we've got proper posture, including our neck. So when you're in your plank position, having a neutral neck where you're actually looking straight down at the floor right between your hands is really important. Let's talk a little bit about shoulders. So when you can just take this position with me seated. When you have your hands like on an imaginary floor, if you push your shoulders out, see how it rounds, and if you pull back, see how it dips. So you can do this shoulder retraction on a wall, or like I am on an imaginary wall, or you can actually do it on the floor. So you can kind of sink into it and you can kind of push up from it. We want to make sure that we're not sunk into it. We want to push away from the floor, but without rounding your spine. So again, a lot of this has to do with your hips being level with the floor, which has everything to do with your shoulders being over your wrist. Does that make sense? So that's going to be the fundamental principles. Now, those of you guys who are just starting your planks, initially, especially if you're carrying some extra weight, putting that pressure onto your wrists can be a lot. And honestly, if you just chip away doing maybe 5 rounds of 10-second planks, then you're doing 5 rounds of 20-second planks, then you're doing 10 rounds of 20-second planks, and then you're doing 5 rounds of 30-second planks. You're slowly building it up to build that wrist mobility and that strength to hold you up. But if you need to modify, coming down to your knees is absolutely fine. Notice how it took me a moment to find the right position for my knees, because if you get your knees right under your hips, this is what we call tabletop pose. You're really not getting a lot of core work here. So what we prefer to do to teach people proper form on the knees is to come up to your toes to begin, get your shoulders over your wrists, have your hips parallel with the floor, and then lower your knees directly down from there. Notice how my knees are behind my hips. So it's as if I'm pushing into my toes, it's as if I'm gonna lift my knees up, and you can feel as soon as you lift your knees up just an inch or two how that core activates. That is what we want. Let's talk about some variations. So one of my favorites is plank leg lifts, and it's important to do this with a straight leg, and you'll want to alternate the right and the left. So when you're holding up a plank, you've got your classic form first, I should say proper form and a classic plank first. If you're successful here and you can hold it for 30 seconds while you're breathing, you can add an alternating leg lift by lifting up alternating legs. And again, when you're doing that with a straight leg, the glute is what's activating, and again, glutes are part of your core. What you won't want to do is lift that leg with a bent knee. You're really not going to get a lot of glute strength there. You might get a little hamstring activation, but I would work towards that. Second variation I wanted to share with you today is plank shoulder taps. So the whole point of a leg lift or a shoulder tap is you're going from 4 points of contact, 2 hands, 2 feet, to 3. That creates instability so that your core actually has to work harder. So when you're doing your leg lifts, you're not lifting it really fast and really sloppy and shaking all around. You're locking your torso in place. You're lifting and lowering slow and controlled so that your body has time to stabilize and activate when all of a sudden you're at 3 points of contact. Similar to a shoulder tap, and I'll show this from a front and a side view. So you probably want to have your feet hip distance apart versus right next to each other, and you can tap to the opposite shoulder. And the big thing here is you want minimal movement through your hips. Okay, so what we don't want to see is this rocking side to side. See how my hips and my chest are kind of rocking? That's a really good upper body workout, but it's not really a good core workout. So I'll show you from the front. Getting your feet wider than hips, pretend that there is a cup of water on your back, and then tapping without letting your hips rock, therefore allowing for that cup of water to stay stable. And by taking away that third point, or I should say that fourth point of contact, you're challenging your midsection. Now if that's easy, Here's the third and final variation I wanted to show you. It's what I call an around the world. So what you would do is hold a plank. Feet are definitely more wide. Head is neutral. Now you're gonna lift the right arm and the left leg, 2 points of contact. And then the left arm and the right leg, 2 points of contact. You will feel your core like crazy in that. Once again, it's a straight arm and a straight leg that are lifting up versus a bent arm, a bent leg. Take some time to lift up, take some time to come down, work your core. Now, final bonus period is whether you're on your forearms or on your hands, I call it the cinch. So when you're in a plank, a lot of times we're just hanging out in it, which in and of itself is work. Hanging out means your hands are just on the floor and your feet are just on the floor and you're just hanging out. Again, that can be hard work, but what we want to do is activate it. So the cinch. If you were on a loose rug and you were to energetically pull your toes towards your wrists and your wrists towards your toes, that rug would cinch up a little bit. That's what we're going to cinch up with your core. So physically, there is very subtle movement in the body. So what it looks like, definitely have your eye on this. Watch. 1, 2, 3, cinch. And release. Cinch. And release. All I'm doing is pulling my palms to my toes and my toes to my palms. Instantly, I get a nice shake. Everything is activated. Holding it for a few seconds while you're breathing and let it relax. Hold and relax. That is one of my favorite planks to share with our classes. So planks are really important. I want to hear from you what your favorite variation of plank is. Maybe if you've held a plank for a record amount of time. And don't overthink your ability. While it's great if you can hold a 3-minute plank, it actually can be a lot harder to go from a plank of holding it for 20 seconds, resting for 5, back to 20, resting for 5, holding for 20, back to 5, as many times as you can. Coming in and out of a plank is part of that core activation versus just holding a steady plank. A lot of times too, we'll forget to breathe if we're holding a plank for longer than a minute. Breathing with purpose, so that's important. So comment below if you learned anything about planks. I'm excited to hear from you guys about what some of your favorite variations are. I look forward to helping you guys continue to gain core strength, be as functional and as strong humans as possible, and I'll look forward to seeing you guys next